Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
The way I look at this whole COVID, I call it business disruption because that's kind of what it is. But the idea is that there's been a shift. And we have lots of shifts in our life. I mean, think about the shift from you doing, stand up to doing a podcast. That was a shift, but it didn't happen in 2 weeks. It happened over years. The internet was a shift. So what is your mission to your customers? Is it to solve problems? Is it to expand their thinking? How are you bringing value to your market?
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And on this show, we have the legend that is Bill Caskey. You can find out more about Bill over at caskeytraining.com. And in this episode, we're getting into how you essentially can become an entrepreneur in your sales role, the importance of having an obligation to getting your customers results, and a whole lot more. So with that said, let's jump right into it. Bill, in this episode, I want to get into obligation, and this is a word that I pulled from yourself, so I want to get into what that means and how what it means for salespeople specifically who are trying to hit the numbers in the unprecedented times that we're living in. So, how does obligation look versus perhaps what we might call like self-discipline? What's the difference between the two of those concepts?
Yeah, the whole point of obligation is that, the way I look at this whole COVID, I call it business disruption because that's kind of what it is. But the idea is that there's been a shift. And we have lots of shifts in our life. I mean, think about the shift from you doing, stand up to doing a podcast. That was a shift, but it didn't happen in 2 weeks. It happened over years. The internet was a shift. Our iPhones and the phones and the content that we can produce on our phones, that's a shift, but it's a modest, subtle shift. This is a 30-day shift where everything about our world has been upended. And so I've been telling my clients, and I work with quite a few corporate business-to-business sales teams, and I said, look, and I just got off the phone today with a gentleman from Barcelona. We had this very conversation. He said, how should I manage my team when everything is in chaos? And I said, you've got to have a stable center. And the stable center is, what's your obligation to the market? What's your mission? What are you all about? Are you all about order and peacefulness? Because if you are, you're hating this time. Mm-hmm. But if you're all about serving your customers and sharing content with them and solving problems with them and connecting with them to find out how you can help them during this time, that's the stable center. And I think sometimes we as in sales, and then I'll stop here because I can get on a very big rant on this. We sales leaders among us, if you have any, sometimes there's some that slip into these calls. They're all about the numbers. A lot of sales managers could care less about the mission, about the cause, about the well-being of the customer or the salesperson. It's all about the numbers. And when that's your core mission, your mission is all about the numbers, the customer feels that. And so I like to get back to this. What's my obligation to my market, to my customer? If we can make that the stable center, we can handle this. We can get through this easily.
That's quite a profound gap that then is between self-discipline and an obligation. In that self-discipline, you can be self-disciplined and do the wrong things over and over and over. Perhaps in a good market, you're enabled to still hit your target, hit the numbers, and you're driving your Porsche at the weekend and you feel great about it. But as you're alluding to there, Bill, and I agree, right? Having an obligation is that the why that we're adding to self-discipline? Is that I think you used the word mission. If that's the case, right? How do we uncover what that why, what that mission is? And I know I'm throwing two questions at you here. So how do we uncover it? But is this also a corporate mission that we need to follow in line with? Or is this a personal mission that we need to create for ourselves?
Yeah, well, I assume that most of your listeners are sales people or account development people. And so let's forget about the corporate thing because that ain't going to happen in this podcast. That's going to be something that happens in a corner office somewhere or at a strategy session. I think we all ought to have missions. We ought to have personal missions as it relates to our work. So yes, we want to provide for our family. Yes, we want to fund our 401ks, our retirement. Yeah, we want to do all that, but I could care less about that. That's an output of your mission in the market. Excuse me. So what is your mission to your customers? Is it to solve problems? Is it to expand their thinking? How are you bringing value to your market? And I think if we get off mission by focusing on ourselves too much, then we lose the opportunity. I always say that if you want to make more money, stop trying to make more money. I mean, the whole numbers thing is a bunch of BS. If you want to make your numbers, stop worrying about making your numbers and start being concerned with what am I putting out in the market? How am I helping people? Am I showing up? Am I taking off at noon? If I'm taking off at noon, then I'm not helping my market. Forget about not helping me and my family. I'm not helping my market. So that's why I like the notion of an obligation, because I think it changes the whole dynamic of success and achievement.
What's the difference, Bill, between having a well thought through, well designed sales process that you follow step by step by step, because someone can give you that, and having success that way in sales, versus perhaps doing the right thing over and over and over for long enough that the success comes to you? What's the difference between those two, or are they mutually exclusive?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis on sales process today that's a little bit misguided. And I think we love the idea of a process that we can throw enough in this end and get something out at this end. We love the certainty of a process. We love it. It's like a meat grind. We throw enough meat in, we get good hamburger on the other end. But I'm not sure that's the best use of a sales process. I think a sales process should be helpful for the customer and you. I always say that if your sales process, if there's no value in it for the customer, if the only value in it for you is when you make the sale, it's a crappy process. A good sale, I've got a client in the consulting business, and one of his parts of the sales process is he delivers to the client 10 to 15 things that he recommends they do, whether they use him or not. Well, guess what his close rate is? It's 80%. Because there's no confusion about his value, because he has shown them his value by giving them something, and they don't pay for it. But he says, what the hell difference? It's good practice for me. It's not, it takes an hour to do. So I think the question, the process is it helpful for the customer? And if it's not, then it needs to be, and you need to modify your process. And that gets back to, well, why are you doing this in the first place? Which is, are you there to help your customer? Here's another thing I hear a lot, and then is, I must have had too much coffee today. The idea that I always ask people, well, are you really into customer service, Will? Are you really into customer service? Oh, yes, Bill. We love to serve our clients. We love it. We love it. We're there for them all the time. And I said, why don't you produce any LinkedIn content then? Why don't you produce any video, anything on LinkedIn? Because if I ask you that, you would say, I do a podcast every week. I mean, I'm doing this constantly for my customers. You're showing up in the market. It's amazing to me how many people who say they want to be good for their customers don't show up. They don't show up until they literally physically show up. And then it's too late. So I would say, start developing some content, start being out there, show your customer that you're truly obligated to their well-being. Because if you're not showing up and then you call on the phone, you're not going to get through. And then we work on, well, how do you get through the secretary? It's like, oh my God, come on. We've been talking about that for 40 freaking years. Stop that.
And this is one of the premises of what we do over at salesman.org, where we make salespeople remarkable. So through content, through increasing their profile, through having a sales process, all the stuff that everyone talks about, we pull it all together, and that makes someone remarkable. If you're missing one of these elements, right, you're just another salesperson. Then you go into what you alluded to there, then you're using tricks, hacks, tactics to get past the gatekeeper, because you're not remarkable enough for the person to want to speak to. So you've got to hack your way into it, which is a bit weird when you put it like that, isn't it?
It is exactly it. And we love hacks. I mean, when, I don't know, did your company do training, or are you more in the consulting of the remarkable part?
So we do training for individual salespeople from the ground up, as opposed to corporate training for leadership management who pass it down.
I got you. Okay. So we're in a similar kind of business, but it's interesting a lot of times how much resistance you get from the salesperson to do what you're asking them to do. And then when you explain it to them, they're like, yeah, I should do that. And then the excuses come, well, but I'm not good on camera, and I don't know what to say, and I'm not a good writer, and I haven't written since college, all that stuff. And I keep getting back to, we all say we want to be great, but we're not willing to do the things to be great. Some of us are. And so my recommendation is listen to Will. Man, if you're a client of Will, or if you should be a client of Will, listen, because he can make you can make them remarkable. And then the sales process doesn't mean all that much. It's people then show up and they say, Will, how can we do business together? That's an easy sales.
And that's my experience. I'm assuming it's your experience having, I assume yours is the longest standing sales podcast on the planet. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, because we say it every time.
Well,
we say it at the beginning of the show.
So and that makes
good.
your show remarkable, right? So that's by just doing that and getting through to that phase. We call it going through the desert of you're a beginner and it's all exciting. You're new to it, and so you're happy to train. Then you become proficient and you hit targets sometimes, and you do well some years, and you suck some other times. Then you get into what we call a desert, where people are. You kind of know what you're doing, but the world moves on, the market moves on, you slow down your training, and it's a bit of a slog, and you've got to go, Seth Godin calls it the dip. You've got to get through the dip to become remarkable on the other side. Clearly, you are now the longest standing sales podcast, so you've got through the dips, you've got that bit of remarkable, you've got that bit of uniqueness. And so salespeople, I have to frame it up in these visualizations. Salespeople have to get through that bit of desert, and it does take time, and it does suck, and you probably will produce content and nobody will watch it or consume it for weeks or months or even years. The first 100 episodes of this show, nobody gave a shit. Nobody watched any of it. The first sponsorship I did for this show, I think it was 85 quid for 2 episodes being sponsored. It was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a night out that I'd basically arranged
but
to
you
myself.
love doing it. Will, you love doing it too, don't you?
Do you know what? I love these conversations. I don't love we've now got a team of editors and graphics guys and all that kind of stuff. But I was doing all that myself at first. I didn't love doing all of that. But I knew that you have to go through the dip. It's almost a gap between you and your competition. And if there's no gap, there's no differentiation. I knew that you had to get through that before you become remarkable and before anyone is entitled to care almost.
Yeah. Yeah. I just find that if a person loves connecting with customers and loves what they do and really believes in their product and believes in the well-being of customers when they buy from them, whether they buy or not is kind of inconsequential. And I know some of your guests I've listened are very into the corporate, the numbers and all that. And I respect them for that. But there's 90% of the sales professionals who are not with massive corporations. They're not with Salesforce and with Google. They're with, a little, company that has 15 to 20 to 50. And so how they show up, you don't have to get that approved by your corporate. If you want to do content on LinkedIn, you don't have to get approved by anybody, just do it. And so I know that that's part of the resistance too, and we just have to get through that. And so anyway, I lost my train of thought there, but I totally agree with you about being remarkable. I think the dip is hard, and you just got to love what you do, and then you'll be able to get through it because you're on fire for it,
So we'll get into the practical side of things of how we get through the dip, through the desert, and how we can become remarkable on the other side in a second. But just to play devil's advocate for a slight moment, Bill, how does this translate for the salesperson who they get paid for cold call X number of times a day? They get a commission on top of that. And how do they translate this so that they can put it into practice when the sales manager, the sales leader, the team, perhaps they're hounding them just to make more calls in this period of global kind of slowdown, as opposed to doing things that are more remarkable or more worthy of attention?
Yeah. Well, it's hard because if my check is cut by the owner of my company and he or she has asked me to do a certain thing and I don't want to do it, you got a problem. I mean, I would say if, maybe you look at finding another company who doesn't want to do things in the old traditional way. And again, I want to be careful. I'm not suggesting cold calling doesn't work. I think it's like a Parthenon. You need a cold call strategy. You need a direct outreach strategy. You need a search strategy. You need a content. But if you have all these pillars working for you, when you go to bed at night, man, you sleep soundly because when you wake up in the morning, you're going to have 2 or 3 people on your calendar who have connected with you or they've heard some of your content. So I think the question is, our day is full of stuff, cold calling, referrals, whatever. Our day is full of stuff. The question is of all those tasks that you do during the day, of all those tasks, how many of are in service to a system that will help you generate revenue? Because cold calling is not a system that'll help you generate revenue unless you're there doing it. That's not serving a system. So how many of the hours you spend a day or week is building a system that generates discussions and leads? And if 0 is spent doing that, you're always going to be a slave and a hostage to it's Tuesday. I got to make 75 cold calls today. You're always going to be a hostage to that. And I don't like that. I don't like that hostage. I think you're better than that.
So there's this cliche, and I agree with it, as cliche as it is, that salespeople should be a business owner for their territory or their patch. I know for me, medical device sales, I just had, I think it was 27 hospitals in Yorkshire. So I just had to be the business owner for those hospitals and sod everyone else and look after my little business. Is that how we should be approaching all of this? Because then a lot of these pieces start to fall into place when we're building something that we own, right?
Yeah, I think the traditional way to look at it is you have a territory, and that territory geography is a thing to sell into. That's where your customers are. So go sell to that territory. But what you're talking about is a better way to look at it. You're an entrepreneur. You have this asset. It's called 27 hospitals in Yorkshire. So you've got to take care of them. You've got to give them good experiences. You got to market to them. You got to build community with them. You got to build relationships. And you also have to sell, but it's one of many things that you're doing versus how am I going to get hospital 26 stuff from me today? And I just think that salespeople, and I've been preaching until I'm kind of tired of preaching it, frankly. I've got some clients who pay me to preach it and then they do that, but preaching it to the general public is hard. You've got to change what it means to be a salesperson. And if this upheaval doesn't do it for you, then probably nothing will. But you've got to stop this idea of my aim is to go sell a person something, and be more strategic about it and say, how can I show up in my market in a way that people want to work with me? They show me what their pains and problems are. They come to me. They call me. Isn't that a better way to do it? Of course it is. But sales managers don't usually think that way. And if you're not with a company that has a sales manager like that, you can start thinking that way. Problem is you're going to run into a buzzsaw when you take something to a sales manager and say, you know what, I'm going to do a podcast in my territory from my 27 hospitals in Yorkshire. And they'll say, no, you need to be making cold calls.
You come up with that example, Bill. I use that example all the time. If I was still in medical device sales, I would get the top surgeons through, maybe there's 30, 40 surgeons, urologists in particular, that were good customers of mine. I would interview them all, call it the Yorkshire Urology Roundtable podcast or something like that. And then I only need the 30 people that I'm interviewing to listen to the show. I don't need thousands and thousands of downloads, right? And that's really valuable content. And you're ticking all the boxes of making surgeons have an ego, whether how politically correct that is. A lot of them have a big ego. You're ticking that box. You're getting them to share their expertise. You're becoming the hub of this new community that you've just invented. So I love that because I use that example all the time, and you teed it up perfectly there yourself. So we're obviously on the same wavelength for a lot of this.
Yeah, but you would do it. Well, now you would do it because you know the power of it. But when you were doing that, maybe before podcasting was hatched, there was a little bit of a limitation. You're not limited now. I've got a client who sells dental capital equipment into dentists, and he's out in Portland. And the first call we were on was about a year ago. We were talking about Facebook groups. I said, how many of you have Facebook groups for your clients? Oh, our clients are not on Facebook. Dentists are not on Facebook. And this one guy, his name is Matt. At the end of the call, he goes, hey, guys, I know you said earlier none of your customers are on Facebook. In the hour that we were on with Bill, I set up a Facebook group, and I've already got 20 office managers of dentists who have joined me. I've reached out to them, and they've joined me, and I'm going to do a 1 hour or a half-hour video show each week where I share ideas and I interview them. And do you know what? He became the #1 salesperson in the company. And do you know, to this day, how many other salespeople have Facebook groups?
Not many, I imagine.
0.
Yeah.
0. Now, wouldn't you think that if somebody was killing it, you'd want to call them and say, hey, Matt, what the hell are you doing? Oh, I'm doing this Facebook group. Well, how are you doing it? How does it work? No, because people are so locked and loaded into, well, I got to go make calls today. In the meantime, people are calling him saying, hey, I want to order that equipment. He sits back, he does his videos. Now he works, but it's a leap to go from the old way to the new way. It really is. It's a mental and emotional leap. And there's a certain amount of grief, I think, that comes with stopping what you're doing because it doesn't work as well as some new way. I think there's this, well, wait a minute, but that's me and that's who I am. And I make cold calls all the time. I love it. I love it. Okay. Sure you do.
So let's dive into this and we'll wrap up with this then, Bill. I was going to go into how we do this step by step, but it seems like the first step is breaking through this identity crisis or this lockdown of identity that we have. And I see this all the time with people, sales experts, you'll have seen it as well. Cold calling is the only thing that matters. Social selling is the only thing that matters. The building marketing collateral or a podcast or whatever it is. And clearly all of that is crazy. And the answer is do it all and suss out what works and then stick with that. I'm a published scientist, but it doesn't take that to narrow it down. You don't need to go through the scientific method in too much detail to work out that you should experiment and do the things that work. So how can we, Bill, get the audience, for anyone who practically or physically knows that this is the good thing to do, the correct thing to do, but hasn't made the emotional commitment to it yet, how do we bridge that gap and get people to experiment with new ways of selling?
Yeah. Well, if I knew that, I would be a very wealthy man. B, I do think you have to show people. I mean, you and I we can talk about this. I could be on your show and you could be on my show every day. It's just blah, 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 it's talking. So the question is, what does a salesperson need to see that would convince them that they should at least try it? Like you said, experiment with it. And I think one way to think about that is, I'm going to draw something out here. Is this going to be a video or just audio?
Both, and I will screenshot the video for anyone who's listened to the audio, and you'll be able to find it in the show notes over at salesman.org.
Okay. I'm going to hold this up, and this is a beautiful drawing. I'm an art student, as you can tell. This is the thing right here that is the gold. This is the gold right here. The gold might be a white paper. The goal might be a course that you have created on how to do podcasting. Think about your world and what could you give away that would be really valuable for prospects. Mm-hmm. If you're in the commercial real estate or commercial office space, maybe you create a little document that says, here are the 20 things that you should do when you think about leasing or when you think about, and this becomes the thing that you want to drive all of your effort to. LinkedIn posts, Facebook, articles, blogs, email, telephone, face-to-face. You're constantly trying to get people in here because this is where they express interest. This is where interest is expressed. And then you can sell them something, you can have a meeting or whatever. But if we don't have a strategy that goes somewhere where people can raise their hand and say, yep, well, I want to know more about that, then we're going to miss people. And if we don't give Will a chance to buy into something or embrace something, then we miss him as a prospect. So that's my visual for it. It's very, as you can tell, it's not very well thought out. But the idea then is if we're just doing a bunch of LinkedIn stuff and a bunch of Facebook stuff and there's nowhere to send people, there's no call to action, then we're expecting it to go from here to here, and it doesn't. It just doesn't. So, showing people that, and then the question is, okay, well, what is this thing here? Because people struggle with that. But it could be something as simple as a Facebook group that brings value. And every time you talk to somebody, say, hey, by the way, Will, have you joined my Facebook? Oh, what is it? Well, I shoot a video every week about 10 things you can do in your dental practice to improve your patient retention. Really? Yeah, I want to see that. So that's kind of my mission. My suggestion is you have to show it. It has to have a strategy to it so that at the end of the day, you get more leads, you get more discussions.
I think I love this, Bill. This is so smart because this perhaps 5 years ago would be you'd have a brochure. There'd be some kind of tool that your marketing team would make, a quiz or something like that. But if you could, and none of that is congruent, and it's all a little bit weird for a salesperson to say, here's this piece of paper that my marketing team put together that I don't really give a shit about, but I've been told to hand it to you. And I've got to hand out so many of them a week, and we've got to tick some kind of box in some software somewhere. But for you to build obviously a Facebook group takes 30 seconds to put together. And again, with the urology example for me, medical device sales, why go to, the first step could be a Facebook group with just those urologists or just your current customers so that they can contact you easier. And at that point, you're building into like network effect and all of these Silicon Valley terms that Facebook are giving you the tools for because they want you to live on their platform. that they'll do a lot of this hard work for you. Whereas again, 15 years ago, right, you had to build it all yourself and it would cost tens of thousands of dollars. So that's genius. Like, especially if you get a couple of your good customers in there first, then anyone joins or anyone who sees the thread of comments before they join, they're going to see all this positive feedback. You're going to be able to answer their questions, help them, and add another layer of that. It's how to describe it. It's almost like public. It's almost like the value that you give as a salesperson, but making it visible, because you might be having all these conversations anyway. But if other people can't peer in, it's difficult to judge the amount of value that you're giving, right?
The value, exactly. Exactly. Frank Kern talks about that. He says, give value before they're a customer. Then I have to give them all the value. You shouldn't, because they can't, but give them a little value. What's the first thing you would do with a customer when they contacted you? Well, give them that. Let them sample your wares. We've been doing sampling in stores forever. That's all this is a sample. But you also talked about the platform. And you talked about it in terms of Facebook and the kind of the big platforms, LinkedIn. But think about this. You can have your own platform on LinkedIn, your own platform. It could be a group. It could be just your connections, your tribe. I've got, 7,000 or 8,000 people. I don't know how many, but I post videos there. I post audios through Headliner. I do articles. I just took a picture of a document today that was in my office. I thought, you know what? Why haven't I shared that on LinkedIn? And that's a way for me to build a LinkedIn platform with content. And I can't tell you how many times someone has reached out to me and said, hey, I want you to do coaching with me, or I love your podcast. Or they say, I've never heard your podcast. I just follow you on LinkedIn and I like what you're posting. And so building your own personal platform, everybody listening to this, if they're on LinkedIn, you have a platform. You just haven't worked it. You just haven't used it, leveraged it, really said, this is an asset for me. This is a core asset. They don't think about that the way they think about, well, who am I going to get introduced to today? I guess I'll scan down. They tell me I'm supposed to spend 15 minutes here. Don't look at it like that. Look at it like an asset. This is your future of your business, LinkedIn. But we don't look at it that way. So I think we should.
I think this is a really good distinction between social selling, which 90% of it is nonsense, and considering yourself an entrepreneur, business owner, and creating that intellectual property. And it could just be, tell me if I'm wrong here, Bill, but it could just be one amazing article, or you pull loads of research from internal within your organization, you put your personality on it, your authenticity, and you repurpose it as here's my thoughts on the industry via the company that I work for. Just one thing like that is enough to get people into a group, onto a page to support you, and you can almost align your mission around that. Am I simplifying this, or is that appropriate?
No, it's a brilliant idea. I mean, it's perfect, because you don't have to create. I work with a large telecom company out of Canada, and then they publish like 12 articles a month on, proper ways to look at telecom and cloud storage and security and all that. And I was talking to about 50 of their salespeople the other day, and none of them use any of that.
Of course,
they might link to it occasionally. I said, why don't you go on camera and say, hi, Bill Caskey here from blank company. We just published an article and I want you to read it. I put the link below. Hope you enjoy. Off. And so attach your brand. And they said, well, the company probably wouldn't like that. And there was a marketing guy in the room. He goes, oh no, the company would like that. You do that. We got to get this stuff read. Hell, we're spending a lot of calories writing shit, but nobody's listening because we haven't promoted it. So that's a perfect example, Will, of how to do it. You don't have to be Steven Spielberg writing your own novels. You can take what your company is putting out, take what other people are putting out, put your spin on it, promote it on your LinkedIn, and you will watch your influence grow. You really will.
And I think it's worth just double down on this, Bill, that, and tell me if you agree, I'm not saying that you should I don't think there's much value, unless you are a well-known influencer, in just sharing content. I think it's got to be your spin on things, right? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. I think that's the easy way out. And I'm not opposed occasionally if you have an article, but that's not creating content. That's not building your brand. That's building somebody else's brand. And this whole idea of influencer, I think we look down on the influencers sometimes, and it's because we see them, sell. But you are an influencer. If you're a salesperson, you better be saying, how can I be more influential in my market?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be selfies on Instagram. It could be articles on LinkedIn. Be the value that you want to be seen as. We all want to be seen as having huge value, but we're not doing anything to help the population connect with that. So I think it's good. Good idea. You're spot on there, Will.
Well, I don't think either of us are going to get much attention wearing a bikini on a beach. So I think we'll stick to the content side of things here and adding business value, right?
Understatement, Bill. Understatement.
Right, Bill, I usually ask one question. I've asked it for 600, 700 episodes, but I'm changing it slightly during the kind of pandemic world that we're living in and living through right now. So with that said, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would you have told him? Younger self could have been 3 weeks ago. What would you have told him to help him better prepare for the period of time that we're in right now?
I heard a guy say, "Oh, that is so February." Yeah, that's a good question. You know what? I'm in a self-help program because I had some issues back in my 30s, and one of the things that they stress in that program, it's a program of addiction, is one day at a time. And I think we can all learn from it's one step at a time, it's one day at a time. Don't get too far. Don't get too far outside. You got today. You've got today. And tomorrow is going to change. So why would I make a plan for 30 days from now? I don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. And so I think I think you have to still look at the future, but you also have to say, I am here today. I'm going to take a step forward today. What you don't want to do is not take a step. And one day at a time does not mean live the same day over and over and over. It means go out, connect with people, look to serve, be tender, be patient, be understanding that people are in a variety of different emotional states right now. Just go out and try to help people. And if your numbers suck for the rest of the year, oh well. I'm more interested in the health and well-being of the salesperson today, frankly, than I am whether they make their numbers this year. I think that it's going to take a toll on the mental and emotional health of salespeople, and I want to be there, and I know you do too, for that, because that's going to serve people a lot longer than whether they make their numbers in the next quarter.
That is the most thoughtful and best answer I've had to that question, Bill. As you were saying that, I could feel my shoulders dropping slightly with not like a weight being lifted off me, but that idea and the process of thinking one day, one step at a time, I think that's quite profound and really valuable for the audience and me as well.
It's the best I got.
Good man. Well, with that, Bill, tell us where we can find out more about you, the podcast, and all the training and coaching that you provide as well.
Yeah, it's real easy. BillCaskey.com, Caskey. It links there to all of our properties and we got my own podcast, and I have the Advanced Selling podcast that I do with Brian Neal, been around for about 15 years. And that's our big podcast. But then there's all sorts of freebies and videos and all sorts of cool things. You can connect with me there as well on LinkedIn. So BillCaskey.com. And Will, I really appreciate you having me on. This has really been a good conversation. And I think it's much needed today. So thank you.
I appreciate you, Bill. Sales Nation appreciate you as well. I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you.